Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om Parameshwara. Good. Be seated, please. Om. Good. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Are we recording okay? No problem? Good, thank you. Welcome to all of you. Welcome also to our many students taking these classes online. We continue, in fact, we're coming towards the end of our summary of the Bhagavad Gita. And we'll begin today's class, as we've been doing, with recitation of half of the Gita Dhyanam. We did this first half. We'll need the PowerPoint. Yeah, thank you. Is that working? Yeah, there we go. So we did this first half we did last week. We'll do the second half today. As always, as I'm chanting, read the translation and then repeat after me. Bhishmadrona tatha jayadratha jala Bhishmadrona tatha jayadratha jala Gandhara nilotpala Gandhara nilotpala Shalyagrahavati kripena vahani Shalyagrahavati kripena vahani Karnena vela kula, Karnena vela kula, Ashwatthama vikarna ghora makara, Ashwatthama vikarna ghora makara, Duryodhana vartani, Duryodhana vartani, Sotirna kalupandav, Sotirna kalupandavarananadi, Sotirna kalupandavaranadi, Kaivartaka Keshavaha, Kaivartaka Keshavaha, Parasharyavachassaroja Parasharyavachassaroja Gitartha Gandhotkatam Gitartha Gandhot Nana Kyanaka Kesaram Harikatha Nana Kyanaka Kesaram Harikatha Sambodhana Bodhitam Sambodhana Bodhitam Loke Sajjana Shadbhararaha Loke Sajjana Shadbhararaha Pepiyamanam Muda Pepiyamanam Muda Bhuyat Bharata Pankajam Kalimala Bhuyat Bharata Pankajam Kalim Pradvansina Shreyase pradvansya shreyase Mukham karoti vachalam Pangung langhayate girim Yat kripatamaham vande Paramananda Madhavam Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutaha Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Stunvanti divyaistavaihi Vedai Sangha Parakramo Panishadar Vedai Sangha Parakramo Gayantiyam samaga Dhyanavastita tadgatena manasa Pashyantiyam yogino yasyantam navadusurasur Devaya tasmai namaha Devaya tasmai namaha. And that concludes our Gita Dhyanam and introduces our next class of review. In our prior classes, we've gone through the first 2/3 of the Bhagavad Gita. I just remind you of this threefold division of the verses. The final third of the Bhagavad Gita, chapters 13 through 16, deal primarily with jnanam, knowledge, but not just atma-jnanam, spiritual knowledge, knowledge of your true self. There's quite a bit of attention given to the world, which is made of 3 gunas. So we'll see some discussion also about those 3 gunas, and other topics will also come. So just to get oriented, so in our last class, we went through, I think, all the verses, all those middle chapters 7 through 12, which were quite narrowly focused on bhakti, on Ishvara. So today, we shift to the last portion of the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 13. The title of chapter 13, Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga. And these chapters are not part of the Mahabharata. The chapter names are not part of the scripture, but they're added on by scholars. Kshetra, this one is the title and the contents of this chapter are very important to students of Advaita Vedanta. You'll see that as we move ahead. The very title suggests that kshetra is field, meaning field of experience. Whatever you experience, that's the field of experience, here called kshetra. Kshetrajna is the knower of the field of experience, you, the conscious being. And this chapter deals with the vibhaga, the separation of those two. And this is Vedanta 101. This is where we begin to distinguish between I and not I, to distinguish between consciousness and material, to differentiate between chit and jada. So that's the opening, that is the title of the chapter. However, the chapter itself has a number of topics. Let me turn my chair around here so I can see the slides. First thing you may or may not notice here is that verse 1 is on the second verse. You think, oh, that's a typo. It's not a typo. There's something tricky going on here, and that is the first verse is not found in the Mahabharata, but it is found in every book on Bhagavad Gita. How to answer that? Honestly, that first verse is not in the Bhagavad Gita, but it is traditionally added. It was written by some great scholar, and that verse is added to virtually every edition of the Bhagavad Gita. Even Bhagavad Gita, as it is, includes that verse, which is not in the actual Bhagavad Gita as it's found in the Mahabharata. Of course, this is done for a really important reason. Don't think it's just an accident or something done casually. It turns out that the chapter is dedicated to answering 3 pairs of questions. But the questions aren't asked. The answers to the 3 pairs of questions come, but the questions themselves were not asked by Arjuna. So this is called an interpolation. An interpolation is when a scholar inserts something to help us understand more clearly. So the first verse is a very deliberate interpolation, and here it gives, let me just point out the 3 pairs of questions. Look at the third line. What is the field, kshetra, and who knows of it, kshetrajna? So that's one of the 3 pairs of questions. Above that, what is nature, prakriti, and what is consciousness, purusha? So that is the second, actually it'll be the third of the pairs. Taken in order, first will come the kshetra and kshetrajna, third line. Second will come that in the fourth line, what is knowledge, jnanam, and how is it, what is knowledge, jnayam, and how is it known, jnanam. I'll explain those terms when we get there. So that is the second pair of questions. What is knowledge? What is to be known? Jnanam. Jnayam, And how is it to be known? Jnanam. I'll point out those verses. And then the third pair of questions. What is nature, prakriti, and what is consciousness, purusha? I'll point out the boundaries when we go from one topic to another. So you can see how this first verse, which is an interpolation, is really helpful to help us get oriented to the chapter. Otherwise, it could be extremely confusing. Okay, so it begins with kshetra and kshetrajna, the field of experience and the experiencer. We'll chant first verse, listen and repeat, and then we'll chant together. Arjuna said, I want to understand these all. I want to understand these all. What is nature and consciousness? What is nature and consciousness? What is the field? Who knows of it? What is the field? Who knows of it? What is knowledge? How is it known? What is knowledge? How is it known? So the first topic, kshetra and kshetrajna. We'll chant together. The Blessed Lord said, Arjuna, recognize the field as the body, as all that's known. The one who perceives the field is called the knower, witness, consciousness. Of each field the knower am I. Within all fields I there abide. About the knower and the field, hear briefly what I have to say. The field includes all elements, space, air, fire, water, and earth. also your body, mind, senses, and everything perceived. Free, and I'll pause you here because without, this is not a college textbook. There are no headings in between the verses, which is one of the reasons we often study this with commentaries. The Bhagavad Gita has many, many commentaries that we can use. And the commentator will be very careful to point out the fact that we've moved on to the next pair of questions. The next pair of questions is about jnayam, that which is to be known, and jnanam, the knowledge, that which makes you know. And here, what makes you know is a set of qualities. In fact, he gives us a list, I think, of 20 qualities approximately. 20 qualities which make you an adhikari, a fit student, a fully prepared student. So there's a series of 5 verses. I'm not sure if it's 20. I have to count again. But I think it's 5 verses that list these qualities through which virtues, maybe is a better word for them. Virtues, forms of emotional and spiritual maturity which make you prepared to gain knowledge of Brahman. So this is jnanam, what makes you prepared. Then will come jnayam, excuse me, which is to be known, which is Brahman. These 5 verses are so important. Puja Swami Tadatmananda, my guru, wrote, in fact, I highly recommend one book he wrote long ago called Value of Values. In that book, he takes up these 5 verses, and he does so in such a lovely way, Value of Values. And these 5 verses actually are so important. As a young student, I recited these 5 verses in my morning prayers for years. These 5 verses, so important, so helpful. So you'll see in 5 verses a listing of the virtues or qualities that make you a prepared student, and then immediately following, Sri Krishna introduces jnayam, that which is to be known. If you're a prepared student, then what is it that you should know? Knowledge of Brahman. You'll see that as we continue. Okay, we'll chant together. Freedom from pretension and pride, patience, harmlessness, rectitude, toward all your teachers, reverence, purity, firmness, self-restraint, dispassion toward desired things, freedom from ego, high and mine, attention to the problems of life, birth, death, old age, disease, and pain, absence of all attachment for children, wife, home, and all the rest, persistent equanimity toward enjoyment and suffering, steady devotion unto me, with single-minded vigilance, contentment in secluded sites, freedom from craving company, commitment to Vedantic study, and for discovering the truth, to gain knowledge, these are the means. All else leads but to ignorance. Those are the 5 verses that then give this list of virtues, qualities, which prepare you. They make you an adhikari, a fit student, ready to assimilate this highest knowledge, which is the next topic. First is jnanam, then jnayam. Together. What you should know I shall now state, through which you can overcome death. Brahman, eternal and supreme, beyond being and nothingness, outside and inside of all things, sentient and insentient, much too subtle to be conceived, so remote yet abiding here, undivided yet in all things, as though divided, thus it seems, sustainer of all that exists, creator and destroyer too. It is the light of every light, shining beyond dark ignorance. It is the knowledge to be known, abiding in the hearts of all. And that is Nyayam. And this last verse is just so poetic. The light of lights, the underlying reality because of which all lights exist, shining beyond dark ignorance. That actually is a paraphrase of Upanishads, the words, language of the ancient rishis, that light which is beyond darkness, the light shining through the darkness. And of course, light is a metaphor here for spiritual wisdom, knowledge, in particular, knowledge of Brahman. But what is so significant about not just the Bhagavad Gita, but the entire tradition of Vedanta is the highest truth, and usually people would use the word God. We use the word Brahman here, but we can use just as well, use the word God. Usually people refer to God as an entity out there, maybe in some heavenly domain. And the approach of the ancient rishis and Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is absolutely opposite. God is out there, but God is also in here. And here's how Vedanta works. God exists both out there, but out there, God is not perceptible. God also exists in here. Fortunately, God is perceptible in here. Now, the word perceptible is not exactly the right word because it's not that you see or experience. Definitely, the God who's in some Brahma Loka, do you experience that God? If you die, come back and let us know. But generally, we don't know. So whatever Ishvara abides in some far-off loka, we have no way of knowing or experiencing or having direct contact with that aspect of God, of Ishvara, of Brahman. But that same God, that same Ishvara abides in you. It's a nice expression. Abides in you as you. That's a very subtle expression. Abides in you as you, meaning as your true fundamental nature has consciousness. The God of the cosmos abides within you as your own consciousness, the consciousness by which you know what's happening right this moment. Now, if you ask, wait a minute, how can my consciousness be that? That's the right question to ask. And Vedanta has plenty of answers for that. The whole journey of spiritual growth is to discover that the consciousness which you think is ordinary, you call it my consciousness, to discover that it's not your consciousness at all. It is, in fact, the truth of all, the reality of all, called Brahman, discovered within. And that's unique. Most other traditions, you are looking out there, relating to something distant from you. But uniqueness here in the vision of the ancient rishis, what you seek is found within yourself, not out there. Okay. With that, we come to the last of the three pairs of consciousness: nature, prakriti, and purusha, consciousness. These terms are very important in the doctrine called Sankhya, but as we've discussed before, at the time the Bhagavad Gita was recorded, the distinction between Sankhya and Vedanta was not a brick wall. Today it's become a brick wall, but in those days it was all part of one big tradition, a tradition of spiritual wisdom which came forth from the Vedas, so you won't see that distinction so clearly in the Bhagavad Gita. It's a meaningful distinction. It's not just a scholarly distinction. It really is important to understand, but that's not our purpose right now in going through this summary. So last topic, Purusha and Prakriti, and we'll see how Sri Krishna explains. Together. As to nature and consciousness, know that both are beginningless. All that changes, all qualities, arise from nature, know this well. Action, power, and agency, from nature these all emanate. But your feelings, pleasure, and pain all arise due to consciousness. Consciousness in nature abides, sensing whatever happens there. This the witness perceiving all is the embodied self supreme. Whatever beings may be born, animate or inanimate, come from the union of the field with the knower, with consciousness, knowing the Lord who dwells within the hearts of all identically, remaining when they cease to be. Those who see this, they truly see. Is that the last verse? No, it's not. We'll continue. All actions done in every way take place due to nature alone. The conscious self remains detached. Those who see this, they truly see. I'll just pause here. Look how important these verses are. We've spent hours and hours and hours talking about what that verse says. The fact that your consciousness remains utterly unaffected by all the problems of the world, all the problems of life, all the problems of your body, of your work, of your family, whatever it is, your consciousness remains perfectly pure, perfectly, completely unaffected, untainted by all that. And this verse makes it so clear. Using this language of Sankhya, it says all actions done in every way take place due to prakriti, is the word used here. So prakriti means everything other than you is prakriti, nature. But the conscious self, purusha, remains detached, unaffected. The word often used in Sanskrit is asanga. Beautiful word. Asanga, unconnected, unattached, unrelated, in a positive way. In a positive way means that which remains pure no matter what, untainted. And those who see this, they truly see, meaning they're enlightened. When you get it, that your consciousness remains utterly unaffected. Okay, let's finish the chapter. Just as space immaterial pervades all yet is undisturbed, so too the self remains untouched, though pervading the body's form. Just as the earth entirely is illumined by but one sun, so too all matter everywhere is revealed by one consciousness. You know, when I teach, I use all these metaphors. I don't make those metaphors up. How many times have you heard me say, the sun shines and is utterly unaffected by what it shines upon? If it shines upon a holy temple, if it shines upon a puddle of filth, the sun remains utterly unaffected. That sun, of course, represents your consciousness, and Sri Krishna himself uses that metaphor here. The metaphor actually begins back with the ancient rishis. Very beautiful. Nice way to end chapter 13, bringing us to chapter 14. Guna Traya Vibhaga Yoga. Guna Traya, the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas. The vibhaga, the division, the separation, the knowing them distinctly. And it's important to recall that in ancient times, these three gunas were considered the fundamental stuff out of which the universe is made. You say, but fundamental stuff is elements, 5 elements. Well, those 5 elements are actually made of these 3 gunas. In fact, interesting, just you know that protons and neutrons are made of 3 quarks. A little bit like that. So atoms make up the stuff of the universe, just as atoms are made of quarks. The elements, the 5 elements in ancient times, are composed of these 3 gunas. The metaphor, the example I've given, you'll recall, is in modern times we look at the universe as being matter and energy. In ancient times, they looked at the universe as being sattva, rajas, tamas. Rajas is a little bit like, by the way, they're not equivalent terms. There's no direct equivalent. There is no direct equivalent to sattva, rajas, and tamas in English. Oh, this is my guru's joke. Sattva, rajas, and tamas are actually untranslatable. There's no equivalent English words for sattva, rajas, tamas. So my guru used to joke, then how do you translate sattva? He would joke, sattva. 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 That's the best you can do is pronounce these words with an American accent. That's it. They're untranslatable. There are no equivalent concepts in the Western world. So instead of looking at the world as matter and energy as we do today, the ancients looked at the world through the lens of the 3 gunas: sattva, principle of purity; rajas, principle of activity; and tamas, principle of inertia and mass, darkness. There are many ways to describe these. And these terms are used also in different contexts. They can be used to describe the material universe. In this chapter, though, Sri Krishna is specifically going to talk about these 3 gunas with reference to their manifestation in your mind. So we're talking about the 3 gunas, not manifest as the material world, but these 3 gunas manifest in your mind, and the consequences of these 3 gunas, and then we'll get to the last topic a little later. So with that introduction, let us begin together. The blessed Lord said, "Again I shall declare to you the highest knowledge, ultimate, knowing which all the sages reach, the goal supreme from bondage freed. Sattva, rajas, tamas, these 3 are qualities from nature born. They all bind the eternal self. to the body this finite form. Sattva, free from impurity, shines so perfect and flawlessly, yet it binds by attaching one to both knowledge and happiness. Rajas, passionate tendencies, born of craving and clinging love, binds every soul embodied here through attachment to selfish works. Tamas, rising from ignorance, causes delusion for mankind. It binds one by attachment to negligence, sleep, and lethargy. Each of these three can dominate, if stronger than the other two. When sattva rises prevalent, the light of knowledge will arise. When rajas rises, these ensue: greed, agitation, and desire. With tamas foremost, these emerge: delusion, error, lethargy. From sattva one gains higher births, and due to rajas mundane births, those remaining in tamas low in inferior births descend. But when this truth is recognized, these qualities do cause all acts, knowing what is beyond the three. One attains to my state supreme, transcending these three qualities. Embodied souls are then released from pain of birth, death, and old age, attaining immortality. You notice the new subject matter that comes in these two verses. So prior verses were an analysis of the three gunas and how they become manifest in your mind and your experience. Then Sri Krishna begins talking about one who transcends the three gunas. He uses the word guna atita. Atita, beyond. Gunatita is one who is beyond the three gunas, which is a word often used to describe an enlightened person. And look at the context. He has been describing the three gunas manifest in your mind. So one who is guna atita is one who is beyond the mind. And beyond the mind specifically as the consciousness which is unaffected by the mind. We gave that the sun, Sri Krishna gave that sun metaphor before. The sun is unaffected by what it shines upon. That sun, of course, represents the consciousness that illumines the activities of your mind. Watch this. When your consciousness illumines the presence of sadness in your mind, you experience sadness, absolutely. But tell me, is your consciousness truly affected by that sadness? The sun is not illumined by what it shines upon. Your consciousness is not affected when it reveals sadness in your mind. Then you say, but Swamiji, I feel sad. Yes, because you are identified with your mind. But are you a mind? Is the mind you? That's a funny question, but it's an important one. If the mind is you, then when you are in deep sleep or under anesthesia, you cease to exist. Do you blink in and out of existence? You have a mind. You are a possessor of a mind. You are not the mind. One of the main purposes of these Vedantic teachings is to help you discern where you end as consciousness and where your mind begins. And that distinction is not easy. They're very much interwoven, which is why we have so much powerful teaching to help understand that. By the way, that Upadesha Sahasri that will continue next week really deals with that particular topic in a brilliant way, how to discern the fact that your consciousness is utterly unaffected in the presence of sadness. This is not hard. You can get it. You can get it to such an extent that in the presence of sadness, you will be able to say, I am okay. Sadness is a normal human experience. Even for enlightened people, sadness comes and goes. But even when that sadness is present, if you are guna atita, beyond those gunas, then even in the presence of sadness, you can say, I am okay. So in the last part of this chapter, Sri Krishna describes that person who is guna atita. Actually, because Sri Krishna used that word, excuse me, that word gunatita caught Arjuna's interest. So he asks specifically, what does that mean to be beyond the gunas? That's Arjuna's question, followed by Sri Krishna's response. Arjuna said, by what marks can I recognize those who transcend these qualities? How did they rise above the three? How do they act, O Lord, tell me? The blessed Lord said, observing with indifference, undisturbed by the qualities, knowing the three perform all acts, they remain firm, unwavering, alike in honor and disgrace, the same toward friend and enemy, abandoning all selfish deeds. They transcend the three qualities, those who serve me unceasingly through devotional practices, transcending all three qualities. In Brahman they are fit to merge. And that concludes Chapter 16, Guna Traya Vibhaga Yoga, bringing us to Chapter 15. Yeah, we're on time here. Chapter 15 is one of the fancy word, enigmatic. Enigmatic means hard to understand. The 15th chapter is enigmatic. It's hard to understand. It begins with this metaphor of an inverted tree. The tree that has its roots in heaven and its branches down below, and then it's further described as a banyan tree that has these tap roots. So you've got this incredible tangle of roots and branches, and the metaphor is you are stuck in the middle of that tangle of roots and branches, the tree of life. Therefore, we have to somehow cut that tree of life so that we can free ourselves of that tangle. We're trapped in a life of suffering by that. They call it samsara vriksha, the tree of worldly life. Turns out, though, that the title of this chapter is Purushottama Yoga. Purusha Uttama, the highest being, which is a completely separate topic, which comes later in the chapter. Some chapters have one topic, some chapters have many. Chapter 2 had many topics in it. And here in this chapter, the opening part of the chapter is this tree of samsara and breaking free of that tree of samsara through the acts of detachment, he says, and through the spiritual wisdom. Then towards the end, this topic of Purushottama comes. I'll pause and point out when that comes. So first, we start with the inverted tree. Oh, just a silly comment here. In ashrams throughout the world, this chapter is commonly recited before mealtime. And it does so. There are 3 verses in the midst of it that specifically deal with food and eating. I'll point those 3 verses out. For that reason, the entire chapter is recited during mealtime. And my bad joke is every time I study or recite this chapter, I get hungry. Because for years and years I'm chanting this verse, these verses before every meal. Anyway, bad joke. Okay, we'll begin. So envision in your mind this upside down banyan tree, tangle of roots and branches, and you are trapped, stuck in the midst of that tangle. We'll recite together. The blessed Lord said, the tree of life has roots above. Vedic hymns are its many leaves. Branches and roots hang down below. Into the world of human acts, its form here cannot be perceived, nor its start, its middle or end. Its trunk, though sturdy, can be cut by detachment. The mighty acts, free from delusion and from pride. With detachment they seek the self, transcending all dualities. They attain the eternal state. There the sun's light can never reach, nor the light of the moon or fire. Reaching there they do not return. That is my own supreme abode. A part of myself in the world has become the eternal soul. Then that part drew unto itself body, mind, and sense faculties, presiding over sight and touch, hearing, taste, and the sense of smell, ruling over the mind as well. It perceives and enjoys all things. See if I got it right. Not yet. Okay, I'm looking for those 3 verses. I don't have it here yet. Continue. It abides in the hearts of all. With eyes of wisdom this is seen. But those deluded and see this, though they may strive. The brilliance of the sun above, illumining the world so vast, and the splendor of moon and fire. Understand that light to be mine. It's here. I just wanted to point out the 3 verses that are specifically, excuse me, 3 verses that are specifically concerned with meals. By the way, you need not chant the whole chapter. You can recite just these 3 verses if you like. These are the 3. My energy pervades the earth, sustaining all the creatures there. I myself nourish every plant, being the sap of life itself. As the digestive fire within In every creature I abide, united with their life and breath. I consume all the foods they eat, being the source of memory and of knowledge and reasoning. I abide in the hearts of all. Through the Vedas am I thus known. We'll pause here. Sorry. So now we come to the final topic of the chapter, Purusha Uttama, the highest being. And the highest being is said to be higher than Prakriti, higher than nature, and higher even than, it ends up meaning Ishvara. So Ishvara, the creator, sustainer, destroyer. Purushottama is Brahman, the reality because of which Ishvara exists. Just as consciousness is the essence of your existence, Brahman can be said to be the essence of Ishvara's existence, and that Brahman here is called Uttama, the highest Purusha being. That's the last topic here. In this world two beings exist, perishing and unperishing. Creatures are all perishable, but their souls perish not at all. Beyond these two is the highest truth. Thus it is called the Self-Supreme, having pervaded all the worlds. The Lord sustains and blesses all, since I transcend what perishes, also the imperishable. Therefore I am the Self-Supreme, praised in the Vedas and the world. The undiluted know me well, as the highest, the Self-Supreme. Thus enlightened they worship me with their whole hearts and with their minds. O Arjuna, I have declared this most secret teaching of all. Knowing this truth, one can become enlightened and fulfilled in life. That concludes chapter 15, and I think we're out of time for today. Next week, so today we've covered 13, 14, 15. Next week, 16, 17, and 18. So next week's class, I think we will conclude our summary of the Bhagavad Gita. And as I mentioned, following our study of the Bhagavad Gita, then we'll take up the Uddhava Gita from the Bhagavad Purana. I'll introduce that properly in next week's class. You can turn off the PowerPoint now. A schedule announcement regarding our Sunday program. I mentioned earlier that we are going next Sunday. First of all, tomorrow, Sunday, we have our usual satsang at 6 p.m. If it's not raining, we'll sit out there. If it is wet, of course, we'll meet inside. Then starting next Sunday, I mentioned before, we will resume our Vedanta class. We're studying Shankaracharya's Upadesha Sahasri. We're starting the next chapter. It's chapter 13, 14. One of those two. And by the way, Pinky has very nicely been preparing all the slides, so she's been a great help and support in doing that. It's important, though, for me to mention that every chapter is completely independent. So if you didn't attend the earlier classes, you won't have any difficulty because the next chapter we study is completely independent. It doesn't build up like many other texts come. So you'll be able to join us. So that's a week from tomorrow at 10 o'clock. That Upadesha Sahasri class will resume, and then the satsang will shift from 6 p.m. to 11 a.m. Immediately after the Vedanta class will be our satsang. So, with those announcements, we'll conclude. We'll finish with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavidam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Uttabasvira Saranam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhagvavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.